Good morning again, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this session about banking regulation and security in an open world. So this morning, I have the pleasure to welcome Frédéric Oudea, CEO of Société Générale, and José Manuel Campa, Chair of European Banking Authority. I'm still not used to see friends between brackets with European Banking Authority, but we are very glad you are with us now in Paris.
Thank you.
Basically, the subject of this morning is very simple. You have been there for almost 2 days now. You may have seen that everybody is speaking about the change in fintech these last few years. And basically what stands up is the main change is everybody works with everybody. Banks with fintech, fintech with banks, fintechs with fintechs, banks with other banks, or why not with any distributors. You have a Grab in Singapore taking a bank license and so on. So everybody is doing or try to work with everybody in financial services. So that gives plenty of new opportunities that we will discuss, but that also brings, of course, kind of question in an open world about security and responsibilities. That will be our topic this morning. So my first question will be for Frédéric. What, in your views, did new technology bring to banking these last few years?
Well, first of all, good morning to all of you. It's a pleasure to speak about these topics. I think the new technologies, it's a revolution for banks. It's a technological revolution in the way we have to think our IT systems, but beyond, it's an industrial one and it's a cultural one. And we have thanks to the new technology, we have a capacity, I think, to deliver a much better service to our clients, a different service, something which is complementary from a presence on the ground. And effectively, we have also a capacity to rethink, rebuild, redesign all our functions, our internal functions, whether it's related to commercial and marketing, but also, of course, to control functions. And as you know, for banks, it's very important. So it's really a very, very important revolution. And we have, of course, to step by step transform the way we think about our activities.
Sorry, I just had a sub-question in that I have the chance to add you for the last 3 or 4 editions, so I see the evolution. I remember one time you say Société Générale is a technology company.
Yeah.
You also had your move on your journey to make that happen. Do you think that today in 2020 you are really in the fast track for this transformation?
I remain obviously always humble on this, but I think we've made further progress clearly, and we do further progress year after year. Can I just explain a little bit? What does that mean again? Rethink the relationship with the clients, the diversity, enrich the diversity of the relationship. What I mean by this, it's not just exclusivity in the way we used to do banking, but there are different business models that we have to think about. Can we ourselves develop what people call platforms? There are a lot of buzzwords.
I will come back on
that
platform
I don't
just
work
after.
Too much, but effectively provide a wider range of services to our own clients? Are we going to provide a financial service to a partner which itself will provide a bunch of services wider than just financial services? What is very clear is in order to do that, first of all, we have to rethink our IT systems. And as you know, transform in a much more modular architecture based on API. This transformation is very complex. I often take a comparison with an industry. I feel like I have to transform my factories. Our factories are our IS system, information system. I have to fundamentally transform my factory while at the same time ensuring the production. So it's a complex process. We invest a lot in this. This is moving forward very well. And step by step, we are building this kind of Lego architecture, which will enable us precisely to integrate services coming from outside, but also to, of course, provide our own services to partners. Second, clearly, as we have discussed in the past with you in the last 3 or 4 years, a much stronger cooperation with an open world. We don't have necessarily all the expertise, we don't have necessarily all the talents, we don't have necessarily all the knowledge. So yes, we cooperate with other, with fintechs, to go more quickly, to be able to be even more relevant in our offering, in our technology. And of course, I have to associate to this concept of cooperation, this revolution for me in terms of IS, which is open source, because we are also in a world where we can access to expertise, developers who are happy to contribute to us, to doing better our IT construction in this open source way and at a much cheaper price. So as you see, many transformation. I don't even speak about the need to organize differently internally with agile mode, etc. You need to think we are really changing everything at the same time. And of course, it takes time, but I must say, in step by step, it's moving also in the right direction.
So in fact, you have been really disrupted, but perhaps not where we think about. You have been really disrupted in your IT organization and all your processes.
The IT organization infrastructure, it's a lever. If you don't do it, no chance that then you can build a new business model, etc. Can I just give you some example? I want us to be able to create new business models. We have just announced the launch of maybe what will become the Boursorama of the self-employed professionals. We are able to do that because we are able to nurture internally entrepreneurs, but also have the capacity internally in terms of IS, and thanks, including to a startup that we have bought, which is called Trezor, to have immediately the platform of services to be quick in the development. So like any entrepreneur, we'll see whether we will succeed or not, but at least we're able to launch ourselves new business models. Second, when we deal with Amazon with our fleet management business, this is typically another way of doing it. Rather, we bring our own service to a very large platform, which is going to sell to its own clients, a service which is accessing to operational car lease. So as you can see, this capacity to move, to develop, to think differently about how we interact with our clients, and of course, to develop a much wider diversity of provisioning of our services has to be done thanks to our IT systems and the new architecture. Otherwise, we are stuck in a very integrated way and we can't participate to the game. Whether or not we will be a winner, it's another story. I'm pretty confident that at least we have created the mindset, the internal levers, the momentum, and the appetite that, yes, there are many things which are taking place at the same time, and I hope with, at the end of the day, some key successes.
Thank you for the transparency. José Manuel, quite the same question, but of course with a different point of view. You don't run a bank, you are more on the side sometime where you push them to many things. So what, in your view, did new technology change to banking in the last few years?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and it's a real pleasure for me to be here and also to be based in Paris. As you said, we are very happy as an organization to be part of the Paris business activity. In terms of, I think, let me start with one point, which I think that it was very clear also on the intervention that Frederick just made. Innovation is not new to finance. Finance traditionally, through history, and banking in particular within finance, has always been very good at introducing innovation into the function of their system. So I have no reason extended to think that this process will be fundamentally different. I think the financial markets and the financial industry and the banking industry will probably be able to integrate innovation, this new wave of innovation, in a manner as successfully. It may be different, as you say, there may be different winners, losers, different landscape, but I think the innovation will be implemented probably really efficient and well, and we see that already. Now, coming back to your point, which the way you phrase it, which I really like it, is the fact that innovation, of course, is all about being faster, closer to customers, better service to customers. I hope that's the case. But it's also about two components that you say, which is about security and responsibility. Of course, from a regulator point of view, that's very important. It's very important that the innovations, as they go implemented, that they guarantee financial stability, that they don't, to the extent that new risks are identified, that those risks are properly managed, properly measured, properly controlled, and the same thing about security, responsibility. As this technology, I'm sure we'll talk about this more as we go on, as this technology are being implemented, that we make sure that implemented in a responsible manner. And there, you see important, depending on the type of technology, but for instance, if we think about artificial intelligence, the potential issues of ethical issues, biases inherent in the process. If we think about other technologies, and maybe competition issues, concentration issues. So those are issues that need to be addressed as we go forward. To put three areas in which I think are important as we go is, one is the dynamic of change. The dynamic of change is very fast, and as Frederick was saying as well, part of the challenge that we have is that many institutions, have to keep running the institution while changing the institution. I hear many times the analogy, I have to fly the plane while changing the engine in the air, well, from the regulator's point of view, that's a concern. Because again, stability and provision of services and critical functions is important. So that's one aspect that I think is important. Second part that's important is the breakup of the value-added chain. We just see there's a lot of things that are being subcontracted, being moved to other parts outside of the bank. I am responsible for an entity that's called the European Banking Authority. I'll come back to this. I have responsibility over banks. But to the extent that the value-added chain is fragmented, it's a source of concern.
Sorry to cut you there, but how do we avoid the Boeing 737 problem in our industry? I mean, because it's a bit of auto-regulation. You ask the bank to certify their supplier, which are not banks that you don't follow, but at the end of the day, there could be somewhere something happening with a sub-part because everything is fragmented. And at the end, the brand will be the Boeing one, so the Société Générale one, even if it's a sub-part somewhere, if you have a big issue. How can we face and regulate this new fragmented world?
Well, as we go forward, I mean, the important thing, and this is one aspect that I view positive, first is to identify the problem. So we have identified that the subcontract in some areas could be problematic. For instance, we just put guidelines on outsourcing, particularly in ICT areas, in which we tell people exactly what you just said. It's like banks are responsible to be able to make sure that they have adequate management of the whole value-added chains. But at the same time, we have sent an opinion to the Commission, which we said, for instance, that we are concerned about some of the providers. Particularly, I'll give you an example that is very well known. There's been a lot of prevalence of subcontracting to the cloud. Now, some of these cloud providers, are perceptions that they have two characteristics which are now problematic. One is that we need to guarantee that regulators, not just banks, but regulators have sufficient tools to be able to have access to these institutions, to audit them and potentially sanction them within the proper standard, rather than relying, as you say, on contractual arrangements between the bank and them. Second aspect, as we move forward in this cloud, for instance, we see that there's a fair amount of concentration in a few providers. So some of those providers, in the language of a regulator, provide already critical functions, and they become critical for the supervisory system. So we need to identify and define what is those concepts of criticality and what does it mean to be a critical supplier to the financial sector, again, in terms of the requirements that you may be exposed to, the audits that you may be exposed to, the regulation, and who should be the authority that regulates that. The Commission has already said that they're going to come forward with an agenda on that part. So here again, regulatory perimeter.
But does the regulation change quick enough compared to this acceleration of innovation and transformation? I mean, you just said you will be, European Commission will work on it, but it's already there.
Yeah, but I agree with you, it's already there. We don't clearly identify just how big the risk is, but as I said, the first step is to identify the problem. As you think of innovation, we'll come back to this, for a regulator's point of view, you don't want to preempt regulation. We need to be neutral to innovation, we need to be neutral in the regulation to the innovation. We need to assess it in a fair way, because you don't want to, if it's an innovation that is potentially good, you want to make sure that it gets fostered. By good, I mean that it provides appropriate service to customers while preserving competition, while preserving financial stability, privacy issues, then it's okay, and you need to foster that, so you don't want to prevent them. You want to always make sure they have an adequate assessment and then put boundaries on the potential risks.
And perhaps, if I may, I think we are looking at different areas of regulation. First, I would say they are the traditional areas. And I think something I would like to reiterate, and there is a lot of confusion on all the debates about new business model, banking, etc. I think the banks in particular have a specific function, and maybe it's at the end of the day their only differentiation, at least for a regulator, the central banks. We collect deposit, and as such, we have a responsibility to protect and guarantee these deposits. Beyond on the payments, on the lending, it's something a little bit different in terms of fundamental responsibility. But here we talk about, I would say, a traditional element. And then you have new areas of regulation, protection, security, and we are all in a learning mode together. We walk step by step to look at new areas. Data protection, something which we did not have to discuss 5 years ago, which is becoming more and more important. We've also a key responsibility there. Cybersecurity, it's probably fair to say 5 years ago, it was at the beginning. We are, of course, seeing an increased risk, and we have to further sophisticate the approach. As we've said, with this breakage of value chain, we have also ourselves the responsibility, as Mr. Campa was saying, We are requested to check that, of course, we have a good understanding of how our partners are dealing with the same issues as we have probably effectively the financial responsibility. So as you can see, there are traditional areas, but also new fields in which step by step we are refining and making further progress to define exactly how to tackle as well as possible for all the stakeholders the right balance between moving forward and, of course, at an acceptable level of responsibility for the stakeholders.
Thank you. José Manuel, earlier in this conversation, Frédéric underlined some confusion sometimes we have in the open banking definition. For European Banking Authority, what is open banking today? I mean,
well, we don't really have a formal definition of open banking. I think it's an industry concept. You know, for us right now, the closer that we are to giving some guidance on open banking has been on PSD2 on payments, in which we put some clarity, you know, we trade off, obviously, the basic principles of enhancing security whilst fostering commercial competition and innovation at the same time. And then we talked about, obviously, access by third-party providers, access to payments information. That's probably the closest in which we have a regulatory aspect on open banking. I think at this stage, open banking is a commercial concept.
And speaking of open banking, when we speak of EBA, usually we speak of, late to have the regulatory framework. They say things, but how do we implement them? Can you tell us where we stand in this framework, legal framework from open banking and PSD2 implementation in Europe?
As I say,
take your time to explain a bit. It's not always easy, so one word won't be enough. Explain a bit.
It's okay. I realize it's a complex environment, but let me just be clear, try to be clear at least. You know, as I say, you know, at the European level, we have the Payment Service Directory, which is really only in the area of payments, which, by the way, in terms of innovation, probably the one that's closer to customers at this stage, you know, in which we have set some principles on the basics of, you know, how payments should be performed and by whom. And that's not, as Frederick was saying, it's not only banks, it's any payment institution that engages in payments. It's a perfect example, you know. And here, you know, the key components was, as I say, you know, security, innovation, and competition. And here, I think there are two areas that are particularly sensitive to the population. One is what's called the secure customer authentication, the fact that customers need to have two forms of authentication to secure the payment. That's an area in which, you know, all the payment industry, and depending on which industry we're talking about within the merchant world, has been more or less progressing. You know, there's been transition, and there's expectation that by the end of this year, that we are full implementation. And the second one, which is probably more popular among citizens, was called the third-party providers, the access basically mainly by banks in this case to information on the customers, you know, that are being provided under the customer acknowledgement and authorization, you know, to third parties to be able to access that information, potentially become aggregators of the payment service and the financial transactions. There again, I think banks have been working very actively on providing adequate access. I think that, you know, there's been a transition in which national authorities have been implementing very carefully, and we expect that this will be closed with a full implementation very shortly across the board in the European Union. You know, some national authorities have been saying that they need the first quarter of this year to be able to have full implementation of this, but we're watching this carefully. Beyond that, as I mentioned before, you know, this concept of open banking becomes more of a national issue. And I know there's national authorities across the Union, of course, across the world, that are engaging in other concepts of broader open banking, of access, open architecture versus closed architecture in provision of certain services. This is more an issue that at the European level currently is not being debated. It's an issue more at the national level, or as I said before, a commercial.
Sorry, just for me to understand, a question about the first part of what you mentioned about e-commerce and merchant. And I've read many articles saying, yeah, okay, it's very good for security, but it's killing my business because 2 steps and so on to validate my payment. Broadly, my question is, how do you work inside an authority like yours to, at the end, arbitrate between the different lobbies, the one asking for more flexibility and the one asking for more security? What's the secret recipe?
Well, I think the key component, you know, is we like to say always, you know, there needs to be the basic elements of trust in the transaction. And at the end, those elements of trust come from a combination of a number of factors. You know, first, you have to be able to have clarity on the value added to the customer. Clarity on the fact that, you know, the information that's being used through that process complies with basic requirements of, you know, privacy to the extent that is needed, security, and information to the customer of what information is being provided. You know, in the area of payments, very clear you're trading off convenience with security. You know, and if we don't have the adequate security, convenience is not that useful because people will not trust the payment method. So that's the basic trade-off, you know, and that's why when we went through this process, as you say, the secure customer authentication. Initially, for most people and for most merchants, it's an additional inconvenience because at the end it requires 2 forms of authentication. Just to be simple, for most people, I think you all know what I'm talking about, but basically you provide your card and at the same time they send you a PIN to your phone or something of that sort. Well, that's added security. Once people get used to it, it's not that different from, which I think is an analogy that I can use, going through security to come into many buildings or going through security to go into an airplane. It's a basic trade-off between convenience and security. And I actually am quite happily impressed of how well this is being implemented across the European Union because there's been basically no loss in trust. Because we could have been in a situation which, people lose the trust on the existing payment methods while we go through the transition, or people think that the new payment methods are so burdensome that they refuse to use them. Unfortunately, none of those things are happening.
Perhaps you want to react on that before I have another question for José.
I think, if you wish, I think we are in a world where we should not compromise on security, in particular because it's even a little bit difficult to qualify, quantify, identify the threat. When you talk about cybersecurity, let's face it, it changes permanently. But I think the consequences of a major problem in the financial sector, in a way or another, would have very, very big damages. So I think it's fair to ensure that, yes, we have to move forward, but not compromising with security and trust.
That's right.
An additional sub-question in PSD2 is, as you mentioned, it's payment. But PSD2, I think, was designed in 2013 with a green book, then all the process, and now it's live. Do you think the market needs a PSD3, not PSD, take off the payment, a BSD3, banking service, where everything is open, not only my payment. I want to be able, as an aggregator, to open a credit inside the system, to access to the wealth management account. I want to see the Société Générale private banking account to be able to do an aggregation of everything to my customers. Today, it can be done by screen scraping, we know that. But do you think we could go further to open more the doors that it's already open just on payment and do it on the full banking ecosystem?
As I said right now, the argument has to be made as we go forward, that there's a customer value added, there's customer need, and there are fundamental barriers that need to be dealt with regulation rather than through dynamics of competition and endogenous function. I think that for me now, more than thinking of those areas, I'm more concerned about other areas, which as innovation goes forward, I see that the perimeter of regulation may not be adequate. I'll give you an example. For basically, our basic regulatory framework beyond banking is based in 2 pillars. The payments, you identify something as being an e-money or a subsidy for money, therefore a payments institution. We have a payments service directory that works, or an investment product. And we identify a particular financial product that has characteristics of investment, and we put that into like MiFID and the investment product regulation. Many of the innovations that we get forward have characteristics that fall between those 2 things, or when I think about crypto, for instance, like that, or somewhere in between. And as I suppose somewhere in between, we might have a hole in regulation. We need to make sure that that's adequate. That's in the product innovation sphere. I already talked before, and we discussed this again, and I very much agree on the subcontracting world, the cloud, the cyber world. There's a lot of areas in which I need to make sure that I identify that the right players and the critical players to ensure security and operational resilience are adequately monitored and regulated. So I think those, for me, are more important from the regulatory point of view, more important perspective.
That's the first question. Your reaction on both questions?
Yeah, and I think we should understand that we are the only one in Europe to have established a PSD2. Yeah. It does not exist elsewhere. So we are taking fundamentally here a risk. I think it's better to try to see how it works, how the system can function on payment, hopefully with no big problem. And let's face it, where at the end of the day, at least at the micro level, if you pay for buying a T-shirt or whatever thing, if you lose your money, it's not a catastrophe. But when we talk about the heart of banking, which is around protection of deposits, protection of savings, I think it's a little bit premature to enter into such an innovative thing without having certainty on the risk. Because if there is a problem, then it's very quick to lose trust. It takes a lot of time to rebuild trust. And when you talk about so fundamental things that around savings for our societies, I think it's better first to stabilize the system on the payment and see how it works.
José Manuel also underlined that more important than that, he saw that there are flaws in regulation because some stuff are not neither payment nor investment, they are in gray area. So that leads me to a question for a banker. Do you think for all this innovation, you are in need of more regulation, different regulation, harmonization of regulation, or nothing to move?
Listen, again, as I've said, certain areas are relatively traditional areas, certain are new ones, and we are still in a learning curve. To comply with regulation is very costly. Can I say that in most of these topics, technology also will help? I personally feel that to comply with certain requirements, here I have in mind AML, with no technology, no way to be able to comply with the level of requests and quality. We have to find needles in a hay maze. So, you know, even if you have hundreds of people, you might miss the whole thing. So we are really in a transformation mode. After this, it's fair to say that there is still fragmentation in Europe. And of course, more harmonization, more capacity precisely also to use technology as a way to meet the demand of regulators is a way to perhaps benefit from scale that we do not have today in our domestic markets, be more efficient in terms of cost. So it's really an ongoing process. And I hope effectively that from time to time we'll be also able sometimes to simplify the request that we have to make to our clients, which can be seen as very cumbersome. When you think about MiFID, same thing. Something which is European thing, sometimes people, the customer, do not understand why we are requesting dozens of pages of things, and you can wonder whether at the end of the day, the legitimate objective is met by all this. But again, it's going to be a progressive evolution, I think, and we are still facing new areas of regulation where we are all in a learning mode. Let's face it.
We have a bit less than 4 minutes left. I will ask both of you to conclude with 2 minutes on one simple question. Innovation and responsibility, what does it mean for you? So perhaps José Manuel, and you have 2 minutes for that, and the same for you.
Thank you. I mean, innovation and responsibility, this is, as I said in my first intervention, I very much like that link from the regulatory point of view, because I think as we go forward, you know, part of the challenge with innovation many times, you know, and I've been in a couple of panels listening earlier today, and this has come up already, is that there's a lot of innovation, you know, which potentially, the potential uses and the spread of those final uses and the value added to the customer, it's identified much later through the process. You know, we have a basic innovation. I'll give you an example, for instance, you know, transmitted ledger technology. You know, the distributed ledger technology, DLT, that's clearly, right now it's an innovation, it's been around. However, the specific applications still are in process of being developed, some of them very later on in life. I'm sure it will have a very large impact, but at this stage it's very early on. Artificial intelligence is another area that I mentioned before, in which are innovations that we don't yet have very clarity on how the application will be. Artificial intelligence, I like it more because of the issue of responsibility. Because of course, when we think about artificial intelligence, you know, somehow we're thinking about doing things that are fundamentally human and have human values and decisions built into it. And as we go through that process, you know, and as we go through the innovation, we always need to make sure that we don't alter the basic goals that are being trying to tackle in the provision of the service to the customer. And those basic goals is providing the service with an environment, a societal environment that has certain values, that has certain characteristics, that above certain biases, that fosters inclusion, as it was said before, that fosters better treatment of customers, adequate protection of the data, adequate safety of the system overall for us, you know, but as I said before, having those elements of trust that are fundamental on that innovation. That innovation adds value to customers, is not harmful to competition, is safe, treats data adequately, is auditable, is traceable, and it can be at some point disconnected if necessary. I think it's important, you know, that we have those characteristics in when we think about how this innovation is trickling into the market and how we use it.
Thank you very much. Frederic, your 2 minutes conclusion.
Well, yes, on this topic, of course, as we can see, we are in a very still evolving and moving world. We know as banks that there will be new competitors, new ways of delivering the services, a risk of a certain level of disintermediation by large platforms, and banks can play the game to be the most efficient provider of financial services. Try also ourselves to build our own ecosystem, which will provide services beyond just financial services. But what is clear to me, at least as long, again, as with the differentiating factor is in particular with, for individual clients, to protect the deposit, to be a trusted partner, keeping trust in a world of there will be problems, there will be risk, there will be issues, is absolutely key. And from that perspective, it seems to me that coupling responsibility and innovation is critical. If we want to succeed, there's no way that we have to associate the two concepts. And I will just finish on the fact that we have been refining, you know, we have updated the expression of our raison d'être. You know, in the French law, there was this incentive framework to think and rethink about why are we there? What do we want to achieve? And we discussed with all our staff. And I must say, the first theme which came is responsibility. And we decided to have a sentence to summarize this raison d'être, which is effectively to build together with our clients a better world and a sustainable world by providing responsible and innovative financial solutions. And I will tell you that we discussed about the right order, and we decided to start first with responsible and second with innovation. The two have to go together, but we discussed even the order, and we put responsible first.
Thank you very much for that conclusion. Before just we leave, I wanted to underline that, as you may know in the program, we should have had also the point of view of a fintech, because Mr. Oudea and Mr. Campa were, of course, very open to have this open discussion with Anne Boden, who unfortunately, for unforeseen circumstances, cancelled too late for us yesterday to replace. But I want to thank José Manuel and Frédéric to have accepted to be also with a fintech on that very difficult subject. It was because some people don't accept. So it was still today in 2020. So, and sorry that we didn't have it. It was a fascinating discussion, whatever. Thank you very much. You can applaud them.
Thank you
very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice job. Thank you.